Well, hello and welcome to another Tyrrell's Classic Workshop. And the endeavour goes on with the Mercedes 600 that we have in, the Mercedes that was generally called the Grand Mercedes in the US, La Grande Mercedes in French, and the 600 Grosser in the UK. And supposedly Germany, although there's been lots of people making comments about whether it's called Grosser or not. Anyway, here it is. The 600 is a legend in its own right, and Instagram, YouTube, etc., the internet generally, is full of noise about the Mercedes 600 because it was an outrageous car in a lot of ways. And I've covered one of the main features of the car is the comfort hydraulic system, as it's called, which is windows, boot, shock absorbers, air conditioning, flap, handbrake release, you name it, door locks on the earlier cars, I mean, sunroof, everything was controlled by high pressure oil. I've covered bringing that back to life in a previous video, but this time we're actually taking it to the next level. We've done some work, some checking of the suspension and the undercarriage on the car, some basic checking, and it's time to have a look at the underneath of the car and how mad Mercedes-Benz went with this car. It was zany, really, the level of attention that they paid to this car, but that reflected in the price. It was, I think, knocking on for twice as much as a Rolls-Royce Silver Cloud when it was new. I mean, insane money, really. And they've been owned by all sorts of people. I've worked on many over the years that have been owned by the Mars family, the chocolatiers, people like that, as well as more well-known celebrities who shall remain nameless. We've done lots of work on these, so I know them reasonably well, and we're going to have a look at the underneath and just do a walk around of the underpinnings. What makes the 600, what made it at the time, such a smooth riding, super luxurious, exotic saloon, which it still is to this day, actually. Let's have a look underneath the 600. Well, we can start at the rear end, to coin a phrase. The rear suspension on this car was Mercedes-Benz. I mean, everything on the car was Mercedes-Benz technology pushed to the limit, but the rear suspension was no exception. It's what's called a low pivot swing arm suspension. On the previous, the likes of the 300 SL Gullwing, the pivot was up here, which meant that the suspension was pivoting like that. With what happened was the wheels had huge camber changes as the travel of the wheel up and down over bumps or under pressure in corners, etc. The wheels actually did that and pivoted a lot, which could mean disaster, because if you hit a bump halfway around a corner near the limit, the wheel velocity would push the wheel up, and it would throw the tyre contact patch out of alignment with the road, and before you knew it, you were going backwards into the scenery. This was a common problem with 300 SL Gullwings. So what Mercedes-Benz did when they refined the 300 SL even more in 1957 with the Roadster, they brought out this low pivot swing axle. So what happens is that the wheels don't move as much in relation to the suspension travel. They don't do that. They do sort of that, and that helps massively with the way the car sticks to the road, because the tyre contact patch is more or less vertical all the time. So this was a real innovation. This was a big thing in Mercedes world in the 1950s and early 60s, was the low pivot rear suspension. It is verging on independent, but it isn't. This is the main pivot here. Each wheel can move independently, but they are interlinked. This car was launched in 1963. They had not yet gone on to independent rear suspension. So actual fact, Jaguar led the way with that, really, and Mercedes-Benz, it took them years to catch up. But it works. It's got, again, this car has got disc brakes on it, very big disc brakes, which again was big news in 1963. Very few cars had disc brakes on them. So Mercedes-Benz were really pushing the technology out there. So we've got this huge differential here to cope with the torque and power of the time. And then as we move along, we can have a look at the floor Never has a floor on a car been more interesting than this. Well, the floor on this car is a double-decker floor, so this particular floor pan here has got a gap. We can do some roll of this later to cover it, and there is another layer above it, so it's actually double layered, a bit like a Tesla with the battery or something equivalent underneath, which goes the full length of the car. So this is a cavity. If we take this off in here, this is actually to get at the prop shaft bearing. There's the prop shaft bearing mount. The prop shaft runs inside here. And this, one good byproduct of this is that if your Mercedes-Benz chauffeur needed to get out of trouble quickly, an assassination attempt, which actually sounds fantastic, but on these cars, a lot of the owners were some very dodgy African dictators to whom an assassination attempt was a part of everyday life. You could actually drive over rough ground without killing the car. You could do serious damage, but you won't take out the prop shaft or something. So it's sort of a form of armour plating underneath the car on every 600 that was built. And in between this is a great big void. And then at the front, for cars equipped with air conditioning, which the vast majority of 600s were, where you put your feet, the footwells, was a third floor section, and that was made of copper, and it had tubes soldered to it, brazed to it, round the underneath of the copper, which were refrigerated from the air conditioning. So you had under carpet floor refrigeration from the air conditioning. How about that? This in 1963. I think, when was the time after that Next had a car with refrigerated floorboards? A long time, I would venture to say. So we move on. The engine and transmission were developed specifically by Mercedes-Benz for this car. This is the mighty M100 engine, 6.3 litre, overhead camshaft per bank, fuel-injected V8. It's a fantastic engine, and it's very powerful and very torquey, but it is not as mechanically quiet as a Royce V8 or something like that. Mercedes-Benz sacrificed a bit of mechanical noise for fuel economy, relative fuel economy, performance, torque, longevity and lightness. The cylinder heads are cast aluminium and the block is cast iron. So yeah, but the whole package was very reliable, and yeah, it fits in here rather nicely because it was designed to. So we move to the front, and we have these huge, substantial double wishbones, which were actually sort of the high tech of the time and have been for many, many years. And to go back to Jaguar, they used a similar system from the 1960s onwards. And all terribly over-engineered. I mean, look at this cross member here supporting the engine. It is absolutely huge. It's like something off a tank. And here again, you can see the dreaded assassination attempt has probably happened here, because we've got a dent and some scuff marks on that, which might as well have been hewn from the solid, really. But yeah, it's altogether an interesting package. This here is a nitrogen-filled receiver. So when the engine runs, the comfort hydraulic system works at a pressure around about 2,800, 3,000 psi, and this is filled with nitrogen, and it's an accumulator. So as the hydraulic pump on the engine fills the comfort hydraulic system, so you can operate all the conveniences on the car, without the engine running, it pushes the diaphragm along there against high pressure nitrogen, and that stores the high grade aviation oil, so that when you turn the engine off, you got up to 30 operations of the windows up and down without the engine running. You can open the boot lid, you can open the sunroof, you can do all that good stuff. And it's all down to that whizzy bit of kit there. So yeah, we're going to, Marcus has checked over the suspension on this car. Generally, we've done a cursory check over underneath. and then we're going to take the car for a run. The other thing to bear in mind is that this car has got self-leveling air suspension. So you've got airbags, as they're called, on each corner, each of the four corners, 2 level valves at the front to keep it level, and 1 level valve at the back, because the fronts are already keeping the sideways trim right, so you only need 1 at the back. And the air suspension on these, if it's right, should hold air for weeks and weeks and weeks. And quite often on Mercedes-Benz 600s, particularly if they haven't been kept up to scratch, the front end in particular will start to sink because the air is leaking out of the system, and before you know it, it's on its bump stops, it's on its haunches. So this one is pumped up, it's fine, it's good to go. So we're going to put my heart in my mouth and take this car around our private land here, the roads. We're not going to take it on the public road, but I'm just going to try this car for the first ever time in my knowledge to see if it actually works. So let's go and take it for a run. Right, well here we are in Mercedes. It'll be very interesting to see how this drives. We've given it a basic check over on all aspects mechanically. I did the video about rejuvenating the comfort hydraulic system a while back. The engine is remarkably nice, with very good oil pressure and added extreme clunkiness from the back end. Yeah, okay. So the rear shock absorbers, I think, need doing. Oof. But it's just a lovely thing, this, even already. I mean, it's amazing, you know, because it's in one. Most people would look at this and say it's fit for the scrap heap, but it has had some work done on it over the years, recently, and you can sort of tell it's a bit of a curate's egg, really. Some bits are really okay, like the hydraulic system, and others are not okay. There is very little worse in life than a Mercedes 600 that's been completely neglected, but this is not bad at all. The driveline is beautifully smooth. That V8 engine and the brakes they were so ahead of their time, the braking system on this car. Discs all round, a great big vacuum servo. It's really, the braking system just feels like a modern car's. There's negligible pedal travel, and they're all there. The bite is really, really good. Yeah, it's the rear dampers that are causing that problem, but that's okay. We have the technology. We can rebuild those. They're switchable by this lever here to actually switch between normal and hard ride height. They have hydraulic valving on the top of the shock absorber, which is very good, very good. I mean, this was out there technology-wise at the time. This is hardly the most beautiful setting. This poor super expensive car, when new, has led a bit of a life, as they all have, but I'm sure it didn't expect to be in this condition, in this surroundings. But I mean, I think they made about 2,300 600s in total, and a lot of them have fallen by the wayside. They were delivered to African countries, Asian countries had a lot of them. A lot of them, the right-hand drive cars like this one, went to Australia, a huge amount. But yeah, the front end is fine, but the back end is not. We've got a red warning light on here, which is the air suspension pressure. We can check that. The air suspension is working. Unusually, I mean, the air suspension, again, was Mercedes-Benz had used it on other models, the 300 SE Fintail, but the air suspension is actually driven by a mechanical pump, as all air suspension systems are, a high pressure pump. But what happens on this is, because Mercedes were pushing the envelope at the time, it's actually each, as I mentioned when we were looking underneath the car, you've got a level valve with a linkage on. The valve is mounted on the chassis and there's a linkage to the suspension arm, so it can read, as the linkage moves up and down, how high or low the suspension is, and it can actually admit air or not admit air as necessary. That was the technology of the time. Nowadays they do have airbags, one on each corner, to support the weight of the car at a certain height, but the height control valves are actually electronic. They're just little linkages with a range of resistances and a sensor, and that admits air into that corner of the car or takes it out. So it's it's just high technology. It's electronics replacing mechanics, but everything on these cars is super expensive, and thank goodness we got some people in Germany who can actually do overhaul work on these cars. This is not quite the customary road test. To say the least, but we've actually got the car moving, operating, stopping, steering, everything else under its own power, and that's good. Loads of grunt from that 6.3 litre engine, that mighty M100 engine. Yeah. And stopping on a coin, stopping on a sixpencer. You can probably hear how smooth and quiet this is, even on the microphone. It really is rather lovely. I've had so many 600s in over the years where people have done bad work on them that has to be undone, and you never know where you're going to come across it. But this I believe to be most unusually basically a good car, because whatever we do to it, it tends to respond quite favourably. So yeah, even the steering feels nice. It hasn't got loads of play in it like they usually have. It's quite shocking actually. Yeah, I actually wonder if those shock absorbers are getting a bit better with use, because it's been a long time since this has been even driven this distance. This is the unglamorous part of classic car restoration, is actually adjusting, fixing, bringing to life, stopping, adjusting, fixing, bringing to life, etc. I'm deliberately doing a little off-roading here to see how the suspension copes. I think that rear suspension is calming down a bit, amazingly. It's just lack of use. I'm just going to drive over this speed bump and see what we have here. I suspect I know the answer, but let's just see. Yeah. Well, never mind. I regard that as a very good initial impression of what this car can be like, as it silently glides into reverse gear. Oh, more work to do, for sure. But Operation Bring the 600 back to life, well, we have in a way done some box ticking there. Very happy with that. We can press on and do something wonderful with this. One feature I didn't mention of the Comfort hydraulic system last time, this is the lengths Mercedes-Benz went to. It was quite outrageous, really. Is the electro-hydraulic parking brake release. So if I turn the ignition on, if I press the parking brake, which is a pedal-operated parking brake, that's now on. When I put the car into either reverse or drive, an electromagnet under the bonnet pulls a ratchet which is controlled, alters a hydraulic switch, which flips a switch and means that the parking brake releases. That is an electro-hydraulic parking brake, in 1963. We'll just do that again. There we go. Into reverse, nearest gear. How about that? 1963 Mercedes-Benz technology. Well, that concludes another Tyrrell's Classic Workshop video. Please like, please subscribe. It does help the algorithms, and we'll be back with something else very soon. Just a few details to cover, sir, and then she'll be as good as gold.